This is the Sony ZVE10 Mark II, and it's pretty crazy. It captures 4K resolution in 10-bit 422, has a new and improved form factor, a really quality image sensor, up to 4K 60 slow motion, can capture 26 megapixel photos, can do 4K 30 live streaming over USB-C, and tons more. Today we'll be testing it out and looking at the pros and the cons, all to find out if it's the right camera for you. Now, before we get started, I just want to say that Sony did not sponsor this video. They did not pay me any money, but they did send me the camera early for review. However, I don't get to keep it. In fact, by the time you're watching this, I've already sent it back, and they have no control over what I say or show in this video. But this video does have a sponsor, and that's Motion VFX. More on that later. What you're looking at right now is a shot from the ZVE10 Mark II with the 11mm lens and kind of this vlog style setup. And this is really what this camera has been designed to do. It's a ZV camera. Z stands for Gen Z, V stands for vlogging. So this really is made for content creators, but I thought it would be fun to push the limits a little bit. So I decided to meet up with one of my friends and create what I would call video portrait of them. He's an artist, and I thought it'd be cool to kind of film him going out looking for inspiration and kind of feature one of his drawings. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to do that in a more cinematic way using only this camera. So what you're about to see is this little short film created on the ZVE10 Mark II. I am stoked with the shots I got from the ZVE10 Mark II. The footage was nice and flexible. I was really able to stylize it and push it thanks to today's sponsor, Motion VFX. Because I was able to capture it in 4K 60, I can slow it down. And I can color grade it. I'll also add in these cool title effects and cinematic letterbox to completely change the look. Here's before and here's after. And I was able to do all of this using simple drag and drop plugins. Motion VFX is a great resource for video creators because they make awesome titles, transitions, overlays, and more. I use their stuff in pretty much all of my videos. They offer plugins for Final Cut Pro, DaVinci, and even Premiere Pro. It's high quality effects that are easy to use. You can check them out at the link in the description below. So we've seen some footage captured on this camera, but now let's talk about some of the specs. I love the overall feel of this camera. It's a really nice and welcomed upgrade from the original ZVE10. It's definitely a little bit bigger, but it's actually kind of nice because it's a little easier to grip, a little more ergonomic, and it just feels more premium. On the top of the camera, we have a zoom lever, some custom buttons. It also has a hybrid switch, so you can easily switch modes between photo, video, and SNQ. We have the built-in microphone, which is actually multi-directional, which is really cool. And we have the multi-interface shoe, which is cool because we can attach more than just flashes. We can do things like Sony microphones and other multi-interface shoe accessories. On the side of the camera, there's a microphone input as well as a USB-C port, which you can use for live streaming, charging the camera, and more. It has a single SD card slot, an audio output, as well as a micro HDMI port. It has a 1/4-inch thread mount, and this camera actually takes the newer, bigger batteries, which I am super happy about. The camera features a touchscreen as well as Sony's newer menu system, which is a welcome change from the original. All right, we've talked about the form factor a bit, but now let's talk about the image quality. This is a crop sensor camera, and it shares the same sensor as the A6700 and FX30. In terms of resolution, it can capture in 4K 10-bit 422. What does all of that mean? Well, 4K is the size of the image itself, so HD is going to be smaller, 4K is going to be bigger. Now let's talk about 10-bit versus 8-bit. The original ZVE10 was 8-bit. 8-bit footage captures about 16 million colors. However, 10-bit captures over a billion. So there's a lot more color information and depth that is captured in the files of the ZVE10 Mark II. And then there's 422, which is essentially getting into color variations, different shades of red, stuff like that. So you'll be able to distinguish these different minor shade differences of color and variations in more detail with 422 footage. Basically, it means it's good quality, it's a significant upgrade from the original, and will come in handy, especially if you're wanting to do some color correcting and things like that. Now let's talk about frame rates. This camera can do 4K 60, which is great. This essentially allows you to get slow motion footage in 4K with this camera. However, I will say, for whatever reason, there is the smallest little crop that happens. It's not like a 1.5 times crop. I don't really know mathematically what it is. It's very small, but it's there, so I wanted to mention it. And then in HD, you can go up to 120 frames per second slow motion. This camera does have SNQ mode, so you can access that if you would like to. That's essentially where the camera will slow down the footage in camera, but it will remove audio. You can also do time-lapse options here, so you can do a built-in time-lapse right in camera, which is pretty cool. Now, if all of this talk about resolutions and frame rates is overwhelming, intimidating, or going over your head, don't worry. I've actually created a free resource for you, my course, supersimplecamerasettings.com. It's basically designed to help you understand your camera better and take full control over it to leverage it to your advantage. You can check it out at the link in the description below. Now, when it comes to low light, this camera does pretty good. It's definitely not as good as like a full frame S-series camera, but it does a decent job, especially if you place the right lens with it that will let in more light. And that's one of the benefits of this camera, is it is interchangeable lenses, unlike some of the other ZV cameras. Again, it's the same sensor as the A6700 and FX30. Now let's talk about the focus with this camera. It is really good. You have great eye autofocus. It has different subject tracking. You can do animals and birds. It has product showcase mode, so you can have it focus on a product if you're holding it up. It even has lens breathing compensation, so you can turn that on and get really smooth focus pulls. It also communicates well with you to let you know what it's focusing on using tools like focus peaking and focus mapping. And it's got great touchscreen tracking autofocus as well. But I will say the one thing that it sort of lacks compared to other Sony releases recently is in this camera, there is none of the AI features. There is no AI processing unit within this camera, so it doesn't do AI auto framing. It doesn't have the advanced AI subject body movement awareness features that some of the newer ones have that just take that really good autofocus and make it mind-blowing. So this one's really good, but I wouldn't say it's quite at that mind-blowing level. All right, now let's talk stabilization. This camera has a couple of stabilization features. You can choose between off, steady shot, and active steady shot. With active steady shot, there is a pretty significant crop. It's around the same as the ZVE10. Maybe it's not quite as significant, but it's pretty close. It's definitely more drastic than something like the A6700. So where I see this coming into play the most is for vlogging. If you want to take advantage of the smoothness that comes from active stabilization, you'll definitely need to invest in a nice wide lens, something like this 11mm 1.8. Let's check out some tests with that lens. Here we are with the ZVE10 Mark II with the 11mm 1.8 lens with zero stabilization. Stabilization is completely off, and this is what that looks like. And here is active stabilization. We're still on the 11mm lens. For some reason, there is no steady shot option available with this lens. Other lenses, like the kit lens, there is. So that's interesting. But this is active stabilization. It's definitely cropped in a bit, but it should be a bit more stable. And here we are on the original ZVE10 with the 11mm lens and active stabilization on. So this is the original ZVE10 for comparison. Right now I am on the A6700 with the 11mm 1.8 lens with active stabilization on, and this is what that looks like. Stabilization is pretty good, but notice the crop that happens. The ZVE10 Mark II looks to be about the same amount of crop in active mode as compared to the original. But now look at the A6700, much less of a crop, and I personally like this better for vlogging and showing off where you are and what's going on around you. Check it out here. We have the ZVE10 Mark II on a tripod and we'll engage active. You can now see how much it crops in. Now, compared to the A6700 when we engage active, you can still see the sides of the wall. It is a bit less of a crop. Again, here's the E10 Mark II, and here's the A6700. I will say that in some of the footage, I noticed a little bit of drastic kind of digital stabilization elements that were happening. And I've noticed this same exact thing in the original ZVE10 as well. And I have yet to notice it on my A6700. I just haven't really seen that same sort of digital stabilization artifacts that happen sometimes. I'm not sure what's causing it or why. It's not a huge deal, and I think that over time you would learn kind of how to, manage that, but it's just something I noticed. So all in all, active stabilization is pretty good, minus the fact that it does crop in a decent amount. Now, stabilization definitely will affect the look of your image, but one of the other determining factors is going to be the overall color. And for that, we have some picture profile options. For starters, we have standard, which is going to be your kind of basic look for the camera. Then you could change it to something like S-Cinetone, which I really like. It gives you a nice look out of camera, but still has some good flexibility in post. And then there's something like Cine 2, which is what I used for a long time, where it's a pretty flat looking profile that you can still grade pretty easily. And then there's something like S-Log 3, which is going to be super grayed out, super flat, but will have the most information stored into it, so you can really pull out a dynamic shot in post-production. This camera also features some different creative looks. This is kind of like, Fuji, how they have a lot of different looks in the camera. That's what Sony's version is, so it has all of those as well that you can mess with, which is pretty cool. It also has log shooting mode, which means you can actually import LUTs into this camera. You can capture your footage in log, so when you bring it to your computer, it will be all grayed out and stuff. But you can set up monitor LUTs on screen, so while you're shooting in real time, you can kind of get a feel and sense of how the footage will look depending on what LUTs you may want to apply. And you can even import LUTs as a picture profile into this camera as well. Now, you won't have the flexibility in post, but you'll be able to have that nice LUT footage look without actually having to color grade. And I want to take a second right here to mention that I've recently released my creative presets and LUTs. So if you enjoy the look and feel of my videos, well, this is sort of that secret sauce. And now it's available for you. You can check it out at my website. But the other really interesting thing that this camera has is a mode called Cinevlog. When you turn this on, it's going to apply black bars to your footage. It will give it instantly a color grade, all within camera, and you can get some of that, cinematic style looking footage. Let's check out an example while I go to the most cinematic place ever to get some lunch. Overall, the image quality that you can capture in camera is pretty awesome, but let's take a look at what happens when you connect this camera to a computer for live streaming. What you're looking at right now is the live stream image coming out of the camera. I have it connected to my computer over USB-C, and I'm currently running it into my streaming software of choice, which is Ecamm. One of the reasons I like Ecamm so much is because I can do things like tweak the image by applying a LUT. So I'm going to grab my creative LUT right here and just kind of drag it on, and boom. It looks a lot better. It's got a lot more style to it. And if you guys are interested in picking up my Creative LUT pack, it is on my site right now. Now, the cool thing about this live stream setting inside the camera is it will actually do 4K 30 over USB-C, and you don't need to use an additional capture card. Also, while you have it plugged in, it will be charging the device as well over the single cable, which is pretty awesome. Now, the only real con that I see happening here is potential overheating. If you're planning to stream for hours on end, you may run into this. But there is a nice and cheap, affordable workaround, and that is this little Ulanzi fan. You can pick this up, it's not too much, and it basically just hooks onto the back of the camera, and you can come over here and turn this on, and the fan will engage. It will actually tell you the temperature, and you can do different levels, which is pretty awesome. And it has a little USB-C port, so you can actually power the fan indefinitely as well if you know you're going to be streaming for long periods of time. Again, I totally wish that the camera just wouldn't overheat, but the reality is I think it probably would, especially going over the USB-C at 4K 30 for long periods of time. So in order to prevent that, this is a nice little solution. When it comes to overheating, I've ran a few different tests. For starters, I placed it in the studio and just let this thing run in 4K with autofocus on, all of that good stuff. And it lasted a while. Like, it did not overheat at all. It ran pretty well. Like, I was very surprised with it. I think I had to ran out of my card at one point, had to change it, and it never overheated. The battery died. It lasted the full length, which was great. Then I also hooked it up to my computer to do 4K live streaming. And it lasted a decent time. It was about 45 minutes or so. And then of course I placed it outside. It was on a very hot day. It was almost 100 degrees outside. And in the direct sunlight, it lasted about 18 minutes. All in all, it did decent. I would say the overheating surprised me. I did not think it was going to do as good as it did. Now keep in mind, these were a few tests. This is not long term. It's first impressions. Could definitely overheat faster. I don't really know. Even this video right now, I've been recording for over an hour and it's fine. No overheating signals or warnings at all. Pretty awesome. All right, this is a little, outdoor, right next to a busy road test with an external microphone. This is the test with the external microphone. And now let's listen to the internal microphone. And now we are on the internal microphone. This is the internal microphone on the ZVE10 Mark II. And this is what that sounds like. You know, it has the auto detect, but I'm gonna go ahead and just force it to the front. So now I have the front on, and the cool thing about it is I can actually force it to the back. So if I go ahead and change those settings, it is on the back setting now. So pretty cool. So if I flip this around, now I can actually show you guys the area that I'm in, and I can narrate while I'm doing it, so that you guys can kind of see, like, check out this thing over here or whatever. I can kind of narrate that, but if that was loud, but if I flip it back around, you won't be able to hear me quite as well. So let me change it. And now we're back on auto. So we're at this little bookstore right now. It's got some really interestingly cool decor inside of it. It's multiple stories, lots of books. Kind of fun. Just here as a family, checking it out, doing some little vlog tests while we're here. It's one of the cool things I get to do while testing cameras.
Haven loves it.
Do you like the bookstore? So, as you guys can see, we are most definitely in the South. We got some fried okra, we got ranch and spicy ranch. We'll have to see. All right, what are your initial thoughts on this little camera?
I like the feel of the grip. I love that it has a bigger battery. Yep.
All right, I agree. Those are some good thoughts.
Ask her. Haven, what are your initial thoughts of the camera? She's speechless.
Ultimately, I think the internal mic is pretty great. It's a lot better than most, especially with the direction options. I like that it could definitely work in a pinch, but personally, I would still choose to use an external mic when possible to get a more full sound. And thankfully, it's easy to connect mics with either the microphone input or the multi-interface shoe. Now that we've talked through audio, let's talk about how it handles photos. It does have some great photo capabilities. It can do different things like bracketing and has a lot of different nice drive modes and focus modes. Overall, it's pretty good, especially because the files are 26 megapixels. Now, there are a few cons with photos. For example, this is electronic shutter only. There is no mechanical shutter, so you may be dealing with some rolling shutter artifacts. And there's also no EVF, which personally, I like to have an EVF for photos and for video. So I would say that's definitely a con of this camera. All right, let's talk about some final thoughts on the ZVE10 Mark II. Now, keep in mind, this is overall still a first impressions. I haven't had a ton of time with the camera. I've had a few weeks with it. So I have tried to test it as thoroughly as I can, but it's not the same as a long-term review where I've really gotten to experience the camera and all of its ins and outs. But here's some of the things that I've noticed and that I would bring to your attention. Let's talk about price. This camera comes in right around $1,000. A little bit cheaper is the ZVE10 Mark I, and a little bit more expensive is the Sony a6700. And this camera falls right in the middle, and so does the price. So let's talk about, a couple of those differences that you may be getting with this camera versus the others. So this definitely is a big improvement from the original. You're getting 4K 60, a newer sensor, bigger battery life, like a newer menu system, a more premium feeling camera. It also has a version 2 of the kit lens. This lens is pretty decent. It is certainly not the most premium out there, but it's not bad. And if you purchase the camera with the kit lens, it's only $100 extra. That's actually what I would recommend doing because it is a small, fun, versatile lens to have, especially for the price. Unfortunately, with active stabilization, I think it's not quite wide enough for vlogging, and the variable aperture is annoying at times for video work. But all in all, for the price, it is a fun little lens to have. All of those things are way big level ups for the amount of money that you'll spend coming from the ZVE10, but with that said, if your budget in all is around $1,000, the ZVE10 original is still really good, and you can, for $1,000 price tag, get a nice premium lens, get some lighting, really build out a little YouTube studio setup with a tripod. Like, you could get all of that for $1,000 with the original, versus here, if that's your max budget, you know, you're just getting the camera. However, I do think that extra couple $100 is well worth it for what you get upgrading from the original ZVE10, in my opinion. But let's look at the ZVE10 Mark II compared to the A6700. The 6700 answers a lot of the shortcomings that this camera has. For that extra couple hundred, you're gonna get an AI processing unit, so you'll have the AI auto framing effects, the subject, positioning recognition, the autofocus performance will be next level crazy. You'll also get 4K 120, so even slower slow motion in 4K. The active stabilization has far less of a crop with the A6700. There's far more custom buttons and custom dials on the A6700. And it has an EVF. So all of those things to consider for just a couple hundred more, to me it seems like the better value. That's not to negate how good this camera is, because it is very impressive, especially at $1,000 price point. It's just falling right in the middle in kind of a weird way, where like, to me, best budget is kind of still ZVE10 because just purely price. And then to me, best value for a little bit more than this one, you get all those extra features with the A6700. So that's kind of where I am lying with this initially. All right, we've been talking a lot about price tags and specs and gear, and while that stuff is fun to talk about, at the end of the day, they're all just tools. Like, you can still use your phone and make amazing content that can change your life and other people's lives. So don't let this gear or lack of gear stop you from creating awesome content. I truly believe that there are people out there that need the content you are going to create. They need the message that you're going to share, and they need the community that you're going to build. There's so much that will happen on the other side of just going out and pursuing this stuff. So get out there, stay creative, and the gear will come over time. Throughout this video, I've mentioned the Sony a6700. If you're interested in learning more about that camera, I've created a full review that you can check out right here. I've placed links in the description below. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, stay creative. Peace.